It's time to take a step beyond. The podcast to inspire creativity and imagination. Here's your host, Dr. Anthony Boston.
Thanks for tuning in to A Step Beyond. Okay, so I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. Whether it was picking up tons of dropped nails at construction sites when I was a kid and then packaging them nicely in sandwich bags and selling them door to door to my neighbors. You can understand houses back then were not built very, very efficiently. Or starting and running a market strategies firm, or being an entrepreneur and designing and building a very unique college campus from scratch. It doesn't matter. It's in my blood. And it's definitely in the blood of our guest today. He's the editor and chief of Entrepreneur Magazine and the host of two podcasts, Problem Solvers, about entrepreneurs solving unexpected problems in their business, and the Pessimists Archive, a history of unfounded fears of technology. He's been an editor at Men's Health, Fast Company, Maxim, and Boston Magazine, and has written about business and technology for the Washington Post, Slate, New York, and others. He's also co-wrote a novel with his wife, which that experience had to be interesting, entitled Mr. Nice Guy, published through St. Martin's Press, which will come out in October of this year. Ladies and gentlemen, the very successful and inspiring Jason Feifer. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. And I love picking up nails and then selling them. That's far better than my idea when I was a little kid, which was painting rocks and trying to sell them door to door, which I don't think went very well. I don't remember, but I don't remember a lot of customers.
Well, back in those days, if you remember, maybe not, they used to drop nails all the time because they were using nail bags and pouches on their waist, and then they would just drop them. Grab a handful, use 3, and drop the rest. So I got permission to pick them all up, and then I'd package them up nicely, and yeah, it's great. So
no, that's great.
So let's start with something.
That's total value.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with something recent. I've been reading Entrepreneur for many, many years. In your editor's note, in the most current issue, which, by the way, is an awesome piece, you wrote about controlling your own story. In the piece, you wrote these words: "Nobody sees your past except you." Talk about that and how it can help people move forward with your ideas.
Yeah, I've literally not gotten more feedback on anything I've ever written than this piece. I mean, this column really struck a nerve with people, which I love. So the origin of it is that I was on a talk show, a live streaming talk show called Never Settle Show, and this woman stood up in the front row and she said, we were doing a little Q&A with the audience. She said, I've faced a lot of setbacks and obstacles in my life, and I just wondered what your advice was for how to move forward. And what I said to her was what I then expanded upon in the column, because I felt like it was just such an important message, and that she had really hit upon something that she probably felt was unique to her, but in fact is something that everybody shares in some way or another, which is, my answer is that, like you said, nobody sees your past except you, which means that nobody is aware of your setbacks, the things that make you feel unsure of yourself, the things that make you feel like maybe you're not as good as you need to be, or that you're not as deserving of the place that you are, or the goals that you have, that nobody sees those things. Those are all ideas in your own head. You don't wear them. They're not something that people see when they meet you. They don't know that stuff. So it's really a decision that you have to make about what you reveal to other people. And I think that often people feel so bogged down by their own insecurities that they just start showing those insecurities immediately. They almost like lead with their insecurities. Maybe they're trying to ensure that that somebody doesn't think more of them than they do of themselves. I don't know, but whatever it is, people lead with that stuff, and I really wanted people to think about what they are presenting to the world and how they're presenting it, because people do not need to know your setbacks. They do not need to know your obstacles unless, and here's the key, unless you show it to them and you make it work for you, because everybody loves a hero's journey. If you tell your setbacks in the form of a hero's journey, which is the story we all know, it's the story every movie and book you've ever consumed is based on. Somebody sets out to do something, they have a setback, they overcome, and they succeed. If you share your story in that way, I guarantee you people will like you. They'll like your setback. They'll see it as a strength instead of a weakness. It's all about owning your own story.
Well, you talk about about obstacles. What do you think are some of the biggest obstacles that people face today when they're trying to be successful?
Oh, number one, honestly, I think is their own. They are their own obstacle. I mean, there are a lot of obstacles out there. Let's not downplay them, and we can talk about them too. But the number one obstacle is yourself, which is to say that if you don't feel confident enough to get into the game to start with, to even put yourself out there and start testing an idea, you're never going anywhere with it. If the number of people who, this is such a simple example, but let's just say the number of people who come up to me at events and ask for my business card and then never email me is so significant. It's so significant. So, I hear that from other people too, where they hand out their business card and then the person never reaches out. And I gotta say, I think there's an issue of a person's own obstacle there. Like, that person, I think, is reaching out because maybe they don't feel confident enough to reach out to me. They don't feel like they're at the place where they need to be to reach out to me. Whatever it is, something is holding those people back. And the people who do reach out to me, I tend to find are just far more confident, or at least they're able to present themselves as more confident. Other obstacles that people have, I mean, listen, there are, of course, really tangible obstacles: funding, available resources, access to peers and to insights into their industries. So many people ask me, how do I find a mentor? How do I find somebody in my industry who can help me out? Human resource is a really significant resource, and it's something that a lot of people feel they don't have access to. And all those things, though, I gotta just go back to the main theme here. All those things tend to go back to confidence in yourself, because if you have the confidence to go up to people that you don't know and start a conversation, start building relationships, you'll develop that human capital. Resources. People need resources, of course, but there are story after story after story that I hear of people who are just super scrappy and they figure out a way around any financial obstacle. And I think that the number one thing is just being so confident that you will not take no for an answer. You will keep finding a way forward.
And I agree with you 100%. I think people are their own obstacle. And I think confidence is a big, big issue today. But I also think focus is a problem too, because, I come from a couple different generations historically, and I've seen life pre-PC, I've seen life post-PC, pre-smartphone, post-smartphone, and I just see over and over again, I think a lot of people struggle with focus. I mean, they have so many, to use an old cliche, so many irons in the fire that they're not really focusing a lot on the important things that they should and have to get done, and they're letting minutia overtake their lives to a certain degree, at least from my opinion.
I hear that. I hear that commonly, and I certainly agree that a lot of people can't keep focused. There's a lot of mission drift in people, where even if you start a company, then they'll start trying to add different missions to that company, and then the company gets confused, or people just can't focus on doing one thing, and so they try to do a ton of things. It's funny, yesterday somebody contacted me on Instagram. People are often sending me DMs on Instagram asking for advice, and there's one person, she reached out and she's like, I have a bunch of business ideas, and I wonder what you think is the best one. And then she just listed off like 8 of the most random things, that they had nothing to do with each other. It was clear that she hadn't done any work on any of them. And so, what I told her was, pick one and test it. You're not going to launch all 8 of those at the same time. Although I will take issue with the way you're thinking. This goes to my podcast, Pessimists Archive, which is really about, at the core, what it's about is that we repeat our fears throughout time, and we often think that technology is the source of the things that are bad around us, and that the change that we experience because of technology is bad. I don't want to I don't want to create the excuse for people that technology is in fact distracting them, that technology is the reason why they are unfocused. People have been unfocused for literally ever. And perhaps the reason that you see more unfocused now is simply because we have a different kind of economy where people have to make their own way more. When 50 years ago, most people were just working in corporate America, or they were working in factories, or they were working in industries where they would enter one space and they would stay there their entire careers. And at that point, the focus is taken care of you. The focus is taken care of for you, right? The environment is creating your focus. And now we're just in a different time. That may not be the technology around us that's creating that. That may be simply that we are in a different economy. We are doing different things, and more is required of us. And it's entirely possible that the greatest skill that people today have is the ability to multitask, to focus on many things at once, whereas in the old economy, the greatest skill might have been to drill down and do one thing really well and do that your entire career. It's just a different world.
Well, I agree with that. And I'm not suggesting at all technology is the problem, because technology is just a tool, and people's behavioral shifts I think are an issue. But I will say, full-heartedly as a psychologist, I will tell you, studies have repeatedly shown that multitasking is from a true definitional perspective, doing two things equally at the same time is virtually impossible, especially if you're trying to do the same types of things that use the same part of your brain. So, like talking on the telephone or writing an email.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah. I don't mean totally. And when I think of multitasking, I don't think of doing literally two things at once. I'll give you an example from me. When I think about multitasking, like my entire day is multitasking. When I'm doing one thing, I'm focused on that one thing. But my calendar today is a little bit of everything, right? It's meetings, it's editing, it's interviews. This is the second interview that I've done where I've been the person being interviewed today, and then I interviewed somebody else today. So so I'm working on magazines, I'm working on podcasts, I'm working on books. I do a lot during one day. The trick is to make sure that you're focused on that one task while you're doing it, and then I think the key to being successful in this economy is just being able to structure your days and your attention in a way in which you're doing lots of different things, but when you're doing one thing, you're really focused on it.
Oh, I agree 100%. And especially today's economy, you have to be able to pivot quick, because things are changing quick. So no question, I agree with you 100%. So let's ask, kind of play on this a little bit. What is the best advice you've ever received? That's one of those questions that gets asked of me a bunch, and I feel like I should spend some time thinking through my life and coming up with the best piece of advice. I mean, the one that jumps out to me that may not be the greatest thing anybody's ever told me, but for whatever it's worth, I started out as a community newspaper reporter writing for a tiny little newspaper, and I was fresh out of college, and I was going and interviewing people who were in jobs and in worlds that I didn't really understand very well, right? I'm talking to mayors of small cities and police chiefs and heads of community colleges and local hospitals and things like that. And I didn't understand often what they were talking about, and that's because I was young and just inexperienced, and I was afraid to acknowledge that. The local mayor would say RFP, and I wouldn't know what RFP meant. And instead of stopping the mayor and asking what RFP meant, I would write it down on my notebook, and then I would go back and I would Google it and hope to figure it out. And an older reporter, I must have been telling this to an older reporter, and they said, listen, you should just ask, because somebody would always rather explain something to you than have you get it wrong. And I realized that, the thing that I was afraid of was revealing that I didn't know something, but it's okay for me not to know something, because the position that I'm in is one of a learner. I'm there to learn, and that person is happy to explain. And in fact, what I found is that when I would stop and I would ask people these basic things, they liked explaining it to me. They thought, oh, well, here's a great chance for me to explain what I do to this person, and this person wants to know about me, and they're interested in the minutia of what I'm talking about. People love that. People love to be heard. They love to be appreciated and understood. And I think that insight is something all entrepreneurs in some way can use. You should never be afraid to go up to someone and ask what seems like a dumb question, because going into something fresh, having the fresh eyes, is really valuable. You have value by not knowing things.
You have value by being the person who comes in and looks at something fresh. And you have to, of course, understand the things that you're looking at. And I just swear to you that when you go over to people and you ask them something even basic, they're happy to help. And in fact, having conversations like that where you're starting at the very, very bottom can lead both of you to great new places.
Okay, so I'm going to shift gears to the magazine a little bit here.
Sure.
And I'm going to ask you a question, and before you answer, I want to qualify it a little bit. So, so how would you describe your typical reader? And before you answer that question, let me say this. I read it tons. I've been reading it for years, and friends of mine who are from my generation, a little bit older, read it too, and we talk about it all the time. So I ask this question because it seems to me, as an older guy, like there's maybe a greater emphasis in the magazine on what I would define at least as younger entrepreneurs. Kind of a millennial versus an older seasoned kind of debate that I'm kind of getting to here. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that, because I know millennials are full of great ideas. I mean, loaded with great ideas. But with the older generations, you've also got the experience and the wisdom and hey, I've been there, done that. I've made mistakes. I've learned from them. I moved on. So kind of go back to the question. So how do you describe your typical reader, and how do you reach them?
You make a great point. I actually got an email from another reader very recently making the same point, that she felt like she was seeing a lot of young people in the magazine and not seeing her generation reflected. And there are, making a magazine is a nonstop balancing act where you want to, or at least especially a magazine like this, you want to be reflective of the world in which your magazine occupies. We're a magazine called Entrepreneur. We should be a central conversation point for entrepreneurs. And I want to, and I do, define that very, very broadly. When I took over this magazine, it was designed as a magazine for small business people. Like, that was the specific, people who thought of themselves specifically as small business people. This was the magazine for them, and it was very service-oriented, which is to say it was like news you can use kind of stuff, right? Tax tips, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And when I took it over, my vision that I had presented, which is the reason I got the job, was because I said, listen, the word entrepreneur may have meant small business person functionally 10 years ago, but it doesn't now. Right now, the word entrepreneur is something that a very, very broad set of people use, and they use in lots of different ways because they see it as a culture and a mindset and a badge of honor. And they call themselves entrepreneurs not just because they're running or starting businesses, but because they think entrepreneurially. They may work for someone else and still think of themselves as an entrepreneur. And I think that's amazing. And I think that we need to harness that energy and reflect that. We need to catch the magazine up to where the culture is. And so the way that I think about who we cover in the magazine and the stories that we cover is really not about any particular kind of person. It's really about how can I tell stories that live in the space of what everybody who thinks of themselves as an entrepreneur can relate to. And I will tell you what, at least in my read, and you can tell me what you think, but in my read, here's what I think everybody, whether they're running they're just like selling stuff on eBay or they're running a venture-backed company, they all have the experience of entrepreneurism in common. That experience, that emotional experience of feeling lonely and crazy and problem-solving your way through walls, those are things that all these types of people experience together, different scales maybe, but they all experience that for themselves, and they can all relate to each other because of that. So when I look for stories, I look for that. I look for problem solving. I look for moments where somebody is revealing some kind of weakness or some kind of vulnerability and how they got through it. That is the core thing in this magazine. So I mean, what you're seeing is not something that I've done consciously, but that you bring it up makes me think more about how I need to correct for it. There is a lot of energy in young people. Like, there's an unbelievable sense of entrepreneurial energy in young people, and I think that may have just we may have gotten caught up in that to the point where we're focusing more on young people. It's definitely not intentional, and so I want to make sure, just like everything is a balancing act. I will hear in the same way that sometimes someone will say, "I see too many tech stories in your magazine," and I say, "You're right. I don't mean to do. It's not a magazine about tech. So I want to make sure that I'm countering that, and so it's a constant balance, and you're right to point it out. But when I think of my reader, honestly, I think of literally everybody who shows up at a conference of ours and calls themselves an entrepreneur. And if you do that, then you're our reader, and I'm trying to figure out how to speak to you.
And listen, I'll go back and I'll say I have no problem with with a focus on a younger audience. Younger people, they have great ideas, tons of ideas. And I often read the magazine, and I see an idea that some young entrepreneur has done. And I'm like, wow, I never thought of that. And then I start thinking about ways to apply to my world. But then that's where I toss in the lessons learned, the wisdom, so to speak, over life, saying, okay, I'm gonna have to tweak it this way, and modify it this way, because it will not work in that current form. So,
yeah, that's right.
So I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying, just on a cursory view, if somebody were to look at it, I think, this is an Entrepreneur for Young People magazine. That's all.
Right.
So let's go younger. So how do you think, if at all, Generation Z entrepreneurs, which are basically teenagers today, will be different from today's current version of entrepreneurs, so to speak, if at all different?
Hey, that's a good question. I mean, so I've thought a lot about why young people in particular are so attracted to the word entrepreneur. I mean, the number of emails that I get from kids, like 15-year-olds who call themselves entrepreneurs, it's stunning. It's all the time. And I always have to I write back to them and I tell them, like, listen, your journey has just begun. Like, there's no reason to reach out to me to try to get your big profile right now. Your journey has just begun. Be excited that you have taken these steps, that you're starting to build something. Learn from them, keep going, and then let's talk. But I'm so excited for you, and I'm excited that you've jumped into this. But why are they doing it? Here's my theory. My theory is because they've come up in an unsteady economy. That we were talking about this before. I think that a generation, 2 generations ago, you could feel pretty confident that you could go and get a job and hang on to it your entire career. And now people know, especially young people who maybe have seen their parents get laid off, who have seen their older siblings have trouble finding jobs, that nobody's looking out for you but you. And if you can build something that is yours, if you can create the foundation under your own feet, you are in a better place. You are owning your own future more. And so I think that's sunk in, and I think that to them, entrepreneurism just means making things happen for themselves. That's my definition of entrepreneurs: to make people who make things happen for themselves. And so I think they see that, and they want to do it, and they want to build it, and also they are surrounded by digital tools that make that as easy as possible. The number of people who are just building businesses on Instagram is unbelievable, and those people who are native to it, who grew up with it, have a intuitively better understanding of it than me, who I'm 37. So I'm not some old guy, but I didn't grow up with Instagram, and these kids did. So what will they be like going forward? Well, I think that they're ever more digitally savvy, of course, and I think that they'll have a better understanding of how to build digital tools and how to use digital tools to their advantage, and they'll just be tapped into whatever the needs are of their digitally savvy consumer peers. But at their heart, I think that it's no different from any other generation of people who were truly entrepreneurs. I think that this young generation and folks of your generation, the best of them are both problem solvers and people who rely upon their own resources and figure out how to make things happen.
It's funny you bring that up, because I was having a conversation just the other day with a couple of business leaders here in town, and we were talking about the fact that you're right. The concept of working for the same employer for 10, 15, 20 years, those days seem to be gone. And we were talking about, well, why is that? It's not because employers want to let people go per se. So we basically came to the conclusion that what we're in today is not so much, it's kind of a free agency economy now, where younger people come into a company thinking, I'm here for 5 years tops. They don't even come in anymore thinking, I'm gonna make this place my home for the next 10, 15, 20 years. They come in thinking, I'm here for a few years, I'm gonna find something better. That they're constantly on the move, like sports, like baseball players who are looking for the best contract from the best team. And that's a little different. I mean, I think the jobs are still there for people who want to work at one place their whole career, but the mindset's different. where they don't come in that way, thinking that way. Like it used to be in the older years ago. You went to work at a company, you stayed there because you wanted to be there. You didn't want to change necessarily. But that I think it's a big change in what's happened generationally.
Yeah, that's really that's an interesting point you make. I mean, I agree with that, although I do think that it does go the other way, where you have large corporations, particularly large corporations who have a constant. They have to be constantly watching their bottom line because their investors demand it. If they're public, because their investors demand it, and they're looking constantly for ways to cut costs. And they're seeing that we've entered into a freelance economy, and they can in fact get rid of large chunks of their staff and replace them with freelancers, and they do, right? I mean, you see it, like, it's happening. And I don't think that they're doing that because they can't find the staff. I think they're doing that because they've found that it's a cost-efficient way to get good labor, and that radiates outward. That's a major change that people learn from, and then maybe it's a self-perpetuating cycle where people see that and they say, oh, well, then I guess I have to be a better freelancer. I have to figure out how to make it work for me as a freelancer. And so then they start designing themselves as freelancers, and then they don't want those full-time jobs. I don't know, but it is certainly true, to your point, that a lot of people do not go somewhere to stay, and that they see the pathway forward as one in which they're constantly hopping around and constantly reinventing themselves. I'm definitely of that mindset and of that generation. I've literally never been at a job I'm 37 years old. I've never been at a job longer than 3.5 years. Never. And that's intentional. I've seen every job as a stepping stone to another job. And so I didn't want to stay. And when I would show up and I would meet coworkers who've been there for 20 years, I didn't understand them. I was like, why are you still here? Like, aren't there other places you want to go? And I have to say that for me, for my own career, that strategy has completely been validated. I mean, I got this amazing position. I'm running a magazine. I'm in a place where people are doing things like we're doing right now, where they're putting me in a position where I share my thoughts and wisdom. I mean, how cool and crazy is that? And I did it because I jumped and learned. And the second that I felt like I had learned everything that one job had to offer, I was on to the next. And also, frankly, that was a great way to get pay raises, because if I was going to stick around, that employer was going to slow roll me on my salary. But if I jumped, I suddenly got a big boost. So it's what certainly people in journalism, when they come to me for advice, young kids trying to get into journalism, that's what I tell them. I say, go somewhere and plan to be there for 2 years and then get out. And that kind of mindset definitely has an impact on industries.
Well, I definitely agree with the boost in pay. The fastest way to get increases in your compensation is to jump. But it's funny because we have some major companies in town, like Microsoft and Facebook, for example, have humongous data center facilities, multiple data center facilities, and other IT companies that have huge data center facilities, and they're constantly trading employees back and forth because they're jumping. They're doing the same job. They're just jumping. And I've been on tons and tons of interviews where the question keeps coming up from with the interview committee. Okay, so which person is going to be here the longest? That person may be a great hire, but they're going to be gone in a year and a half. So why hire them? So that's kind of the negative side of this. On the other side of the spectrum is I think employers aren't, and the ones I talk to all the time through our local greater area partnership and chambers and stuff. They're now kind of looking for, hey, I want somebody who's going to stick around for a while, which leads me to my next question because
Although, actually, wait, can I just add a comment to that before your next question? So just wait until the generation of job hoppers are the people who are hiring.
No,
right?
I know.
Because then those people will totally understand the job hoppers, which is me right now. So like I love my staff. I don't want any of them to leave, but if they do, I totally understand, because this is what I did, and so it's what I ultimately anticipate them doing, and that's fine. I think that's good, because it means that they're constantly challenging themselves, and that I just have no fear about finding someone else who's great to come in. So I mean, I don't want those people to leave. I want to hang on to them forever, but I will totally understand when they leave.
Well, I'm with you on that too. I mean, I don't want people to leave either, but especially if I've invested time and money into them. But on the flip side of that, I want them to do what's best for them. So I get that
Right.
100%. So, one of the things that drives a lot of this on the employee side in a business is education, skill sets. I mean, do you have the skills I need? So we're constantly selling skills. So thinking forward a little bit, what do you think? Coming from the entrepreneur side, coming from the media side, what do you think higher education might look like in 10, 15 years?
That's a really good question. I'm going to just say at the start of this that I'm no expert in this subject. From my seat here, the people that I talk to, the entrepreneurs who I talk to, who are job hoppers and they're constantly reinventing themselves, what they need is a very broad skill base, and they often are picking that up on the job, or they're not really picking it up at school. But at the same time, I don't know that it would have made sense for them to specialize in something in education, and so maybe a kind of broad education set would have been good for them. I don't know. I'm dancing around that answer because honestly, I just don't even know where it's going to go. First of all, it's a slow-moving industry. I could absolutely imagine that the real answer is that in 10, 15 years, higher education looks exactly the way that it does now.
Very similar.
Yeah.
Or the delivery model may have changed.
Maybe. But I don't even know about that. I mean, I don't know. When I was in college and from 1998 to 2002, there was video conference classes, and people saw that as the wave of the future. But it's not like people don't go into classrooms anymore. That just kind of got integrated into the way that we learn. But it's not like the entire model changed because of things like that. I don't know. What do you see? What do you see in the future for that?
Well, I see a greater use in technology. Obviously, I mean, online instruction has increased tremendously because it's convenient. It works within a flexible lifestyle where people want to be able to integrate work and life better. And the problem with online instruction is it requires a lot of self-discipline, and so you have to do a lot of things on your own. And I can tell you firsthand that a lot of college students really need to have that babysitter, so to speak, person kind of over the top of them saying, you need to do this at this time because they're not getting it done. Because they learn in short bursts, and so technology I think will play a big part in that. Things like the increased levels of artificial intelligence, augmented reality, virtual reality, things like that. I think will become bigger players in education because, frankly, people like to learn in a more visual way anyway. So.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what? As you were talking, it occurred to me that I have actually had a number of conversations with people at schools lately and saw one pattern emerging in entrepreneurship, which is the number of schools who are encouraging students to start companies at the school and then are incubating them in some way. Mm-hmm. It's been really funny. There are a lot of schools that have launched programs like that, and then they all come to me telling me that they're the first to do it, which is just not true. A lot of them are doing it at the same time.
Not true at all.
But that's really great. And it could speak to a direction that higher education is going in that colleges are going to become more comfortable thinking of themselves as laboratories where the learning isn't something that's provided necessarily by a teacher, but that they're just creating an environment for people to build and learn, and they're there to guide. Which I would love, because I had, as a student, I had just no use for a classroom. I hated sitting in a classroom. I resented sitting in a classroom, and I really feel like most of what I learned that is valuable to me now is things that I learned on my own in real world settings. I didn't go to journalism school. I just got a job in journalism, and which is not to discount education. I mean, I got a great education, and I'm sure I'm infinitely better for it. But the things that stand out to me, the things that I feel like have really made me what I am, have all been in the workplace, not in the classroom.
Well, what you're seeing growing now, you're right. You have the research parks and universities, et cetera, that are basically having students come in and work with faculty to create new technology, new whatever, new sciences, et cetera. And then those are spun off into companies. That happens all the time. Healthcare does a lot with higher ed, and they spin that off into a company. But I think you see a growing makerspace concept going on. I mean, more and more schools are building makerspaces where basically you provide them all the tools they need to create, and then you have faculty who are guiding them in the process. And then during that process, they learn what they have to know to be successful. So if you're going to create something in electronics, well, you have to learn some electronics. You have to learn some math. You have to learn some things to be successful in doing that. But because it's more hands-on, it's more tactile, it's more tangible, they are more into it, so to speak.
Right.
So if I were
that's a great point.
If I were to give you $20K today to invest in something emerging emerging market technology, what would you put it in, and why?
Oh my gosh, nobody's ever asked me that. I have no teed up answer for that. It's funny. I have this is not the answer, but the first thing that comes to mind is my brother-in-law's best friend has made $50 million on Bitcoin and Ethereum, and which is like infuriating. And now he's just like living this insane life. And we were talking about it last night. And so I told him, I was like, go text him and ask him. I was like, tell him that I am willing to spend $500 on some cryptocurrency. Where do I put it? And so he responded, and he was like, you should go find like the next hot ICO. And I was like, I don't know what the next hot ICO is. You tell me. And so he told me something or other, and I pulled it up on Google, and then I couldn't figure out how to put my money in, and I gave up, and that was that. But yeah, I mean that stuff is just ridiculous. What would I put my $20,000 into?
It's funny you bring up cryptocurrencies because, in a way, those are scary in a way because they're not the slightest bit tangible. I mean,
right?
In your mind, you think, well, someplace, somewhere, somebody can just wipe a server and it's gone. I mean, it's just toast. So it's like, it's kind of hard. I know people are making lots of money at it, and I know people who are losing lots of money at it. But it's just like, wow, there's nothing tangible attached to it at all. Zero.
No.
Zero. At least you buy a stock, you got some company ownership there. You invest in some gold. You have that gold. You got something, but there's nothing with this but some zeros and ones somewhere.
Yeah, it's true. It's crazy. So this is not my answer, but I'll just offer you like some kind of industry insight that I happened to come across, which I thought was interesting, which was that. So I'm writing a story for a future issue about it's set in the like the baking mix and prepared food space as this interesting company that we're writing about, and I got this Ibis World analyst on the phone and was talking about that space, and she said that So in the last 5 years, the baking mix and prepared food industry has grown by 2.6%. In the next 5 years, they expect it to only grow by 0.5%. And that that industry is so interesting. That industry, the four major players in that industry only own 20% of the market, which means that there's a bazillion little small guys out there who are all innovating where the big players are not. They're doing your organic and your healthier and your various high quality ingredient stuff and all that. And I said so what's going to happen? What's going to happen once that industry slows down? And she said what's going to happen is that these four major players are going to be concerned and they're going to want more market space, and so they're going to start acquiring all of these the leading small guys because they're not going to want to spend the time to go build out their own organic lines and all that stuff and then try to attract that audience. They'll just acquire to get market. And so people who are really well positioned in that space just need to hang on and get as much market share as they can, and then they'll get acquired. And that something like that makes me realize that if you can understand an industry and understand where the white space is in the industry and where that industry is going, that you can go spend your money pretty wisely. So putting your money into like a consumer packaged good that has identified a white space and is building its own audience is going to get a pretty nice chance at growing your money. So there's some investment advice for you.
Well, I mean, IT companies have been doing that for years. Microsoft, Google, Apple.
Yeah.
They've been acquiring the small players who are innovating all the time, and they just acquire them.
Right. Although those are often it's interesting because those sometimes you buy for a feature, you buy because it's a competitor, and you just want to get rid of it, or you acqui-hire. And a lot of those tech companies, they just have so much money that they can buy somebody's startup as a way of just hiring the founder. And you're not seeing that in consumer packaged goods, but yeah, it's very interesting to see the reasons why big companies are buying small.
So your magazine talks a lot about creativity in business. How would you define creativity to someone, and then what do you do to stay creative?
Well, creativity. It's funny. I feel like creative people who work in what are traditionally creative fields feel like they have some kind of ownership over the term creative. But I think you totally can be creative in any industry. You can be creative in tech. You can be creative in consumer packaged goods. I think creativity is really no more than creating. I mean, just to be kind of baldly obvious about it. When I think of creativity in business, what I think of is people who are able to have a vision. They're able to see something that people want, or they're able to create something that people didn't even know that they want, and that they're able to communicate it in a really exciting way. That they understand how storytelling works. They understand how to communicate a message that's more than just buy this thing. I was just today talking to the co-founder of Policy Genius, which is a company that helps people find what insurance policy to buy, and their marketing is hilarious. It's really, really funny. I spotted it on the subway. They do these parody of subway poems. If anybody's ever ridden the subway in New York, you know that there's all this weird subway poetry that's on the walls. And so they did a parody of the subway poetry, which I loved. It's just it jumped out at me. It was so funny. And I asked her why. Why is that the brand voice for an insurance company? And she said the reason is because otherwise nobody's going to listen to an insurance company. You need to be able to reach people where they are, and if they're not ready to talk insurance, you got to talk about something else. So to me, that's where how do you harness it? Where does it come from? Where does it come from for me? The answer is, I got to say, no different from what I do all the time when I'm being interviewed or when I am talking to someone or I'm in a meeting, which is that I just start talking and I see where it goes. And I just am not afraid to start and adjust along the way and read the audience or read myself or test and get feedback. And just as long as I think the most important thing about creativity is just giving yourself the space to be creative. And sometimes that space happens in real time, in real life. It could mean putting something out there in the world, seeing how people react to it, and then adjusting. It's just about being flexible and having a ultimate vision for where you want to go with it, but being totally okay not knowing exactly what the path is.
What are you reading these days? Do you have a favorite book other than mine, of course?
Yes, other than yours. I only read yours over and over and over again.
Yeah.
So let's see. I mean, the last book that I read, I don't read a lot of business books, I got to be honest with you. The last book that I read was called The Saboteur by a friend of mine named Paul Kix. It was an amazing piece. It was about a French resistance fighter during World War II who was a aristocrat who went and he trained in England, and then he joined the French resistance, and he got caught by the Nazis 3 times and broke out 3 times. It's an unbelievable true story. He had so much access. I mean, kudos to Paul. He doesn't speak French, but he figured out how to tell this story by going around France with a translator, and it's just an amazing rollicking tale. So I strongly recommend it. And then the next book I'm going to read, which I just ordered, is also by a friend of mine. This is the thing that happens when you work in publishing, is that you just have all these friends writing books, and you have no time for books not written by friends. So Mary Pilon wrote a book called The Kevin Show. I just pre-ordered it, and it'll be coming to me soon. It's a true story about a Olympic athlete who has a rare but not isolated. This is an actual thing, a rare psychological disorder where he thinks that he is the star of a reality show, like Truman Show, like a Truman Show effect. And so that has at times destroyed his life. And so it's about his life and about that particular kind of phenomenon and where it comes from. And I'm really excited to read that. It just sounds fascinating.
That sounds like good stuff. Okay, so we have a lightning round we do with all my guests. So basically I'm going to give you a bunch of either-ors, and then you pick the one that resonates with you immediately. Don't overthink this. Just answer the question quickly, all right? You ready?
No. Okay, so no justification?
No justification, just which one resonates. Ready?
Okay.
Phone call or text?
Text.
Sunrise or sunset?
Sunset.
Television show or movie?
Movie.
Facebook or Twitter?
Twitter.
Toilet paper, over or under?
Over.
Grilled or pan-fried?
Grilled.
High-tech or low-tech?
High-tech.
Nickelback or the Stones?
Oh, the Stones. Does anybody pick Nickelback?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I have a funny story. I'll come back to it. Call of Duty or Pac-Man?
Pac-Man.
Sweet or salty?
Salty.
And the big one, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Oh, that is a big one. Star Trek.
There you go, brother. You know, it's funny, on the Nickelback one, I have to laugh because one of the guys that I would have never, ever in a million years guessed would pick Nickelback over the Stones was Colonel L. Warden, who went to the moon in Apollo 15. He's 86 years old, and he picked Nickelback.
Really?
Oh, yeah. He's a big Nickelback fan. So, Jason, hey, I want to really thank you for taking the time you spent with me today. Let me end the show by asking you this. It's not a secret that the majority of startups fail. In fact, there have been many articles in your magazine that discuss that very thing. And it's funny because Barb Corcoran, who's on the cover of your current issue, I just saw her a few days ago. She was here in Des Moines, and we had a conversation, and she did a nice presentation about Shark Tank in her TV show. And what's funny, or scary, I should say, is that she said after 3 years, even with the help of the sharks, less than 10% of the businesses that they help are still in business. Which is kind of I did not expect that. You know, with their money and their guidance and their mentorship, I would expect a little bit better than 10%. But so it's an uphill battle. If you could share one piece of advice, key advice, with people who might be thinking of stepping out on their own and starting a business, what would that be?
So it would be the counter to that statistic, which is true that most startups fail. But here's the thing: it doesn't mean that most entrepreneurs fail. Because an entrepreneur can start many, many companies,
right?
And there's a big difference between a person failing and a company failing. A company failing is very straightforward. A person failing is not straightforward. You may have to go through many failed companies to reach your success, which is not any different from me sitting down to write a story and writing 5 different leads and deleting them to get to the right lead. Didn't mean I failed. It meant that I had to go through a bunch of bad ideas before I got to the right idea. So the most important thing for an entrepreneur, for somebody who's willing to put themselves out there into this startup world, is to accept that failure happens and to challenge themselves to get past it, because that's the key. The key is not to reach a failure and stop. The key is to reach a failure and then keep going.
Well, thanks, Jason, man. I appreciate it. You've had an amazing career, and your magazine is an invaluable resource for all entrepreneurs of all types. And I would encourage everyone to read Entrepreneur, no matter what they do for a living, because there is some sound advice in those pages for all types of people. And thank all of you for listening and taking a step beyond with us. Let's face it, starting a business isn't easy, and making it successful is even harder. According to a piece in Entrepreneur, some of the biggest reasons cited for failure were a lack of focus, a lack of motivation, commitment and passion, too much pride, taking advice from the wrong people, a lack of good mentorship, or the right knowledge needed to be successful. Unfortunately, these characteristics aren't just important for starting businesses. They're important for anyone in any job. However, the good news is that none of these reasons are insurmountable. And with a little discipline, dedication to continuous personal improvement, and, of course, reading great content like that found in Entrepreneur, you can definitely improve your odds for success. I hope you'll continue to listen to A Step Beyond and become inspired to be the best version of yourself. I'm your host, Anthony Postion. Follow your dreams.
Thanks for listening to A Step Beyond. Take a moment, if you would, and leave a review on iTunes and share the podcast with those who need to be inspired to become more creative and imaginative in everything they do.